Welcome everyone. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the International Mentoring Community. What I'm doing is providing a quick introduction to the video. This is a community conversation about mentoring, and it opens up on a topic of mentoring stories are important now. I think we would all agree, those of us who are mentors and those who are stepping into mentoring, that stories are a great way to share insights with the mentee or learner or protege. This conversation opens up more insights for you to consider as you bring stories and more stories into your mentoring arrangement, your mentoring relationship. It starts with what is a story, then it makes connection between stories and mentoring, and then asks about stories are more important now than ever. Is that correct or not? Make sure you leave a like around the video, hit the comment section, and leave us an insight to add to what's taking place. With that, take care.
So from my perspective, storytelling is one of the foundational pieces of what I call effective mentoring. And so it's a way for me to share my lived experience with the person I'm spending time with.
From my perspective, stories are important because they emotionally engage and connect with the mentee. And it's our way of connecting on that human level. Often it's an intimidating environment at the beginning for the mentee. They think, oh, am I going to say the right thing or the wrong thing? And it helps build that bridge to every story is a good story. I'm curious and interested in what you have to say.
So I use storytelling a lot, analogies particularly in my storytelling, because it's a way to bring a foreign concept or idea to within a context that a person can understand, and that it's like a real fast shortcut to helping them leap from an area that they already know about to something that's completely new to them.
Just adding on or echoing to all of this, stories are a way not only to generate brain triggers and scientific triggers to actually create an emotional response and connection to those story pieces, but it's also a way to capture attention and create intrigue. And as adult learners move through absorbing information, you need to have those attachment points to keep their interest and to allow them to start building their own experiences on top of information that's shared. So that provides a pathway for people to, like you had said, be able to really engage with the learning and start to build on top of that.
If I was to add, there'd be words like entertain, educate, right? There's words like that we put in, the ability to do some healing. But one of the ways that I'm using stories is certainly to move sometimes things that are complex, complicated to simpler, and then maybe bringing it back again. So the notion of the bridge, okay? And I've used it where there is this sense of, a reminder of what was, bringing the best of that into what can be, and working it. And then I enjoy creating the story with the people I'm working with, whether it's a mentee. And often, because I've played with kids for so many years, I'll actually have the kids help me with the story if I'm working with them, right? Rather than just telling the story as it was, is have them create it because they lean in, okay? And they get involved with it. So that's another way to look at stories. Let's jump in and really look at mentoring. Stories are important now more than ever. I'm just going to add that to it. Any thoughts about that? You're sitting now as a mentor, or sitting there as a mentee, right? Why are stories so important in that connection?
I really think about the contextual components of the mentoring engagement. So where that person is at a specific point in time. So when I think earlier to as the pandemic took hold and set in, and people were responding obviously in very, very different ways, and also not understanding other people's response. So why is someone responding this way when I'm feeling this way? And being able to use stories to help build contextual understanding, I found really helpful, because for one person, being in the midst of a pandemic and staying home and watching more Netflix than normal and not going out to eat was perhaps a very minor imposition relative to a time when, you know, they were diagnosed with cancer, or a time when someone in their life was significantly impacted by even a move and a journey. And so when you bring people back to that contextual space and you can relate to them in that context, then the story that you tell adjusts as a result. You can define, is it a big deal or not a big deal? And then relate to them, meet them where they're at.
There's a couple of examples of where I have mentored entrepreneurs. And this notion of story, I shifted it a little bit, and I said, well, let's create a story that you can publish. And I said, if there's something that you want to share with the world as a story, I have this technique called action outcome books. And what I said, well, let's collect some of the ideas that you have to share with the world, which is a way for you to collect together your learning from our conversations and what was the best of what you bring from the past and what you think is the best from the future. And let's use our story sharing as a way in which to consolidate our interactions. And it proved to be very interesting. And I've had 2 people are in the process of writing their books in that. One person actually took it so far as to create a whole new LinkedIn course. But it came from mentoring. It came from that sharing of the stories and them sharing their stories and having it happen. That's why I put, and even more now, I think if we expand our ways of interacting with mentees, all right, yes, the conversation is great, but is there other ways in which to add to that to broaden out what might come of that conversation that's possible without being directive, prescriptive? That's not where I want to go with it. Is if they don't want to do it, then we don't do it. But it's just something that I have started to do around mentoring stories. So I just thought I'd pop that in.
Well, something that I've used in the context and using stories in the context of mentoring is because I tend to do a lot of work where I'm leading people into something where they've never been, like to do something they've never done before. Because a lot of my work has been around implementing new technology, including like things that had never been done before. And so what I use stories as a way to kind of get people out of their I guess boundaries or notions of who they are, to kind of go into a little bit of a fantasy world even. Like, so I've used the concept of a time machine in a meeting before leading my team because they were having trouble visualizing what something would look like in a couple years into the future, or 5 years. They just kept thinking about what it would be tomorrow. And so I actually brought forward, I said, okay, let's all get into a time machine and we're going to go forward 5 years. And now we're going to talk about how does it work now? And that was really a story, and it makes it playful too, which also helps people get outside of their own personal restrictions about what they think is appropriate in, say, the workplace or something like that, and it allowed the unleashing of more creativity. It worked really well, actually. Yeah, so I've used storytelling in that kind of a way, but it was actually more, well, it's really co-creating, right? Story making. I just launched the framework that took them out of the office space that we were in and put them in a new space in our collective imagination, so that we could create first in our imagination and then in physical space what actually was needed to be done. So
So we usually, or we a lot of the times, use storytelling as a way to share our lived experience. My question that I'd like to pose is, can we use storytelling as a predictor of what may come? And so where I'm going with that is that I've had a mentoring engagement, and this was an outcome of that particular engagement. And so I'm starting to tell a story that's relatable to a situation. Is it possible to use storytelling as a predictor of what that outcome may actually be for that particular situation?
well, I think so, because within a story, as humans, we make assumptions about a lot of things just by default. We're not even aware. And I think if we can create a story in a way that expands people's preconceived notions or assumptions about what's possible, right? And thus create larger possibilities for them. And, I believe I've done that in the past. So yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, because I think we talk about mentoring being a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and the mentee are going to grow personally and professionally. So if I'm sharing a story, I too should, as the mentor, I too should learn from that story, even though it's my story that I'm sharing those experiences. There are still opportunities there for me to learn and grow as well as a result of that. And that can be very simply how the mentee reacts to the story, or that can be simply how I react to how the mentee reacts. And there's learnings that can come from a number of different ways for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, even going back to the whole idea of video meetings, I now that you've said it that way, I've used storytelling to help people create the framework around how a video meeting will be. So, because I remember, I don't know, it was in the early 2000s that I had a Skype meeting with someone where we used video, and I was just amazed at how it just felt like we were across the desk from each other, even though we were on the other side of the country. And so then after that, every time I'd set up a meeting with somebody, I say, oh, let's do it this way, because it feels like, so I'm telling them in advance, it feels like we're all sitting at the same table. And so then they would come to that video meeting already feeling like they're sitting at the same table. And therefore it happened. It was very comfortable for everyone.
I was thinking as you were talking about the storytelling as well in terms of the Choose Your Own Adventure books. And as you're mentoring and asking the questions, it's like, even if it's a very dramatic scenario. So if you get fired, what happens? And if you don't get fired, what happens? And sometimes just really opening up people's minds to how that story will play out. Okay, it's not the end of the world. We take a next step. Life goes on. It helps them build their own story with that predictive capability as well.
I think just wrapping a few of those concepts together, that's what's on my mind in terms of being able to define risk, and we can use that safe space of a story because we are picking and choosing what pieces of input come into that story. Often when we're telling a story, we're not encompassing the full perspective of multiple players. We're telling it from our own personal perspective. And so looking at that and using that to define risk, that can be used in a creative brainstorming scenario where saying, like, let's remove all the risk from this corporate circumstance, or let's remove risk from a personal circumstance, or even just define it, set it aside and look at a different scenario, are all big opportunities of that storytelling conversation.
So I think what we're doing is we're offering for the world is that it's not one person just saying something. There are multiple ways in which a story can unfold. And I think that is a point for those who might be listening to this video or watching this video, is if you're new to mentoring, it's not just a one direction. If you go back and listen to what we've just shared, there's lots of ways in which to bring to life the lived experience and the mentee interacting with you. And I would certainly encourage anyone who has been listening to this, put your comments in here about how you're using stories, sharing them, telling them, creating them, developing them, whatever it might be, because I think that will add to this conversation that we're having here. But if I can, I'd just like to take a quick extension to this. Mentoring stories are important now more than ever. Can we take an extension and see where this goes because of what's happening now, being that this is June 2020? The practice of mentoring going forward, stories more important now than ever. Can we pick that thread up and see if it takes us somewhere? Who would like to start?
I think you're going to, with going down that path is going to take us down, and I'll sort of say it the way I'm thinking right now, but it's down the mental health, mental well-being path. So in a lot of the conversations that I'm having with individuals, I need to be cognizant of and listen to the story that they're telling me about what they're experiencing, because it could very well be anxiety, it could be stress, it could be a number of different things that are impacting them personally as well as the people around them. So for me, the statement that it's important now, if not more important than it ever has been, is very, very true. And I think we as mentors, certainly the path where I see mentoring going is being able to be part of that support structure for mental health, mental well-being, post-traumatic stress. I firmly believe that now, if not ever, that we do need to be paying attention. Our listening and hearing skills need to be turned up a number of notches, because there are lots of stories that we're not hearing.
That's I really like where you're taking the conversation, because as you were talking about it, I was thinking about the art of storytelling. And at one time, that was the only way that information was conveyed, was through this aspect of storytelling. And over time, the art of storytelling has changed and is diminished in many cases, which is why, you know, McKinsey Consulting can make a fortune off rebuilding the art of storytelling. But there's an aspect of the art of story listening. And so why am I hearing this story, and why am I hearing it now? And what is all of the contextual components that are woven between the lines of the story that maybe are or are not being articulated, that are being hinted at for me to go and tease out, because that's where that person's mind or heart is at that moment in time. So mental health.
Interweaved with a lot of this too is understanding your role in those conversations. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, in terms of opening up space for mental health specific conversations and interactions, is understanding your role as a mentor is a person to hold space, to create trust, to establish a safe space for vulnerability. You could get told things that are uncomfortable. You could get told things that are outside your context of what you have knowledge on or can appropriately fully respond to. And being humble in that as a mentor is very important. Knowing your limits and knowing your professional boundaries, and having a strong network to be able to provide that person with appropriate support that doesn't have to be you, and in most cases maybe shouldn't be you as the mentor, is just a really important distinction. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. It's something that can really help our mentee find the supports that they need through a full holistic approach.
Yeah, and I think we have a obligation as professional mentors that we need to have access to that resource base of professionals. And we also need to know that there will come a time and a place where you need to hand off. You still own the relationship. So I still, with some of the folks I'm working with, and you're absolutely right, some of the stories, the stuff I've been told would curl what hair I have left on my head. But it's knowing where my sort of where my line in the sand is, and it's also understanding where my capabilities as where they stop and where they need to be handed off. And I also have that obligation to maintain that relationship with my mentee, and to ask the questions, you know, do you have professional help, as I did with this one individual that I'm working with that has gone through a very, very, very traumatic childhood. And like I said, when the story started to unfold that she was sharing, I went, this must be a dream or something, a bad dream, a nightmare, because I don't know how anyone could ever be treated this badly, but yet it was true. But you're absolutely right. It's imperative that we know what our capabilities are, because what I may be comfortable dealing with may be different than what you're comfortable dealing with. But more importantly is what my boundaries are, and where I can go to hand off. Hand off is sort of a term I use, but to be able to get that professional help that they need to have.
What I'd like to add to all of that is that I think in these times that storytelling can bridge the gap between, you know, basically a talking head and lived experience, so that, you know, we can actually land the message with the mentee, and also help people understand, you know, that different people are having different experiences right now. You know, as I've done a lot of volunteer work in the prevention of domestic violence field, and, you know, not everyone is just being inconvenienced right now. There's a lot of challenges going on with people being at home in situations where they don't normally spend that much time there. And so it's really, you know, to Doug's point, it's important to understand boundaries, and sometimes just listening is enough, and not making assumptions about what the other person's experience is.
I think in getting ready to take us towards closure, I would offer the following: just because you think you can doesn't mean you should. And just because you think you can be a mentor and hang up a shingle and go at it doesn't mean you should. Same as for coaching, same as for a lot of things. So if you're listening into this, that's an important element of what's going on, because understand what stories can do, whether faction or fiction. It's important. And just pay attention to that. And to that end, what I'd love to hear from each of you is a very quick, what's a key insight that you'd like to share around the notion of mentoring stories, from whatever angle you'd like? What is it you would like to go out with a smile on your face to say to everyone?
I'll jump in first. I think the key word that comes to mind is just normalizing. Normalizing sharing, conversation, and just creating that open space so that there is a safe starting point for somebody to have a conversation. Hopefully that's your mentor, might be formally or informally, but we just need to normalize having conversation.
I'm gonna echo on what you just said, as in and this topic hasn't come up yet today, but is the whole idea of creating that safe place for that conversation to take place. I think in a lot of cases we're not comfortable doing that, or that we just don't know the steps to take to be able to do that. But as a takeaway from today, I think that we all as mentors need to remember that we need to be able to create that safe place, that safe environment for that conversation to take place, for the sharing of those lived experiences, for the sharing of those stories, for them to be able to provide the value that they can.
And I just wanted to add that listening is really important, even within the context of storytelling. Like, how is that story landing with the other person, I think is really important, because if it's not landing well, then maybe don't continue with the story. Like maybe some adjustment is required.
The emotional component of the storytelling is the part that really brings it to life. So much of what we do is very intellectual, very academic, that being able to just enjoy, lean into a good story and hear all aspects of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, is a great privilege and really what mentoring can offer.
And I would just share as a kind of fun activity, if you like to play with words, take the word story, turn it into an acronym, and what unfolds for you. Because sometimes listening to what we've just shared, there's an S word, a T word, an O, an R, a Y, and it might be fun just to sort of see what you come up with. So that would be something I would offer out. Now, I know we're getting to closing, so I'm going to say thank you for joining this conversation. I certainly appreciate it. Thanks for watching the video. We have an ask of you. Make sure you click the subscribe button and click the bell beside subscribe so you can receive more notifications of the videos that we're loading up. And like the video, and especially if you could comment your insights. We would enjoy learning from you. Take care.